In previous episodes of the Think Wildlife podcast, we talk about tackling human elephant conflict in India and Africa. Today, I am joined by Anandi Gandhi, who is studying elephant and farmer interactions in Thailand. As someone who has initially worked extensively on agriculture, Anandi brings fresh perspectives into this pressing issue. Tune in to learn about her exciting work. So, welcome Anandi to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Anish. Really nice to be here too.
You are currently studying elephant farmer coexistence in Thailand as part of your PhD. What got you interested in the topic?
Yeah, I actually, one of the best things about what I love about my PhD topic is that, I can explain it in one or two sentences and like pretty much everybody understands what I'm talking about. So when I'm like, oh, elephants, they're so excited. And I get it too. I also feel excited. But I'm not someone who has been in the natural sciences or wildlife. I actually came from a philosophy background. My bachelor's and master's are both in philosophy. But I've always been interested and working in work related to agriculture. So over the last 15 years or so, I've mostly been studying and working in agriculture and looking at the negative impacts of industrial agriculture on the environment and the lives of farmers. And so, sort of it is through this angle that I became interested in environmental issues and struggles of farmers. And at some point, I also became like a very avid amateur wildlife lover. And, it's impossible not to somehow feel some kind of awe or love for elephants. And at some point, I realized that, actually, there's so much conflict between farmers and wildlife in general, and also Asian elephants. And when I kind of realized that, I felt like, oh, like this is something I could really see myself working on it because it brings my passion for wildlife and farmers together. And I think when I started looking into this topic, I read this article about a farmer in Thailand who had figured out a way to coexist with elephants in her area through her agricultural system that was very conducive for the elephants and for her economically as well. And so I was very inspired by her story, and I wanted to learn more about what she's doing, her system. And so I wanted to study that, and that's how I ended up applying for a PhD. And right now, I'm doing my fieldwork, and I'm in the anthropology department. So I'm approaching this topic through anthropology, agriculture, and a little bit of ecology. So it's quite interdisciplinary. So talk about what you are specifically focusing on as a part of your PhD. Okay, sure. So yeah, I'm in the anthropology department at University of California, Santa Cruz. And so like I said, I'm taking sort of this anthropological lens, which is ethnography, which is one of the main methods is ethnography, which means you sort of try to understand the cultural and historical and beliefs and values of people and landscape to understand sort of to get the stories that make up the topic. And so my topic so my region of research is Eastern Thailand, and just to give a brief context, in Thailand the issue with human-elephant conflict is the most severe in the east, which is where I'm working. And there have been about 40 deaths this year already. And Thailand has about 3,000 to 4,000 wild elephants. So not a lot, but in this region there are maybe 600, and they're quite dense for the amount of forest area there is. So I'm so for my research, I decided to focus on coexistence. So even though the situation is so severe and there's so much conflict, there are many different things happening on the ground, and I wanted to focus on coexistence because often, you in mainstream narratives you hear about conflict, and then it's the way it's portrayed is like elephants and villagers are at war, and often it kind of vilifies either the farmers or the elephants. And I think we have a very distorted imagination as outsiders who don't live with elephants about what coexistence and conservation is. So when you actually go on the ground, I found that there's a lot of empathy and tolerance and understanding on the part of the people who live with the elephants. And considering like the amount of losses they face, with crops, even losing their limbs, homes, or even family members, I found that no one has hatred towards the elephants. So I think that's why I particularly wanted to look at the terms conflict and coexistence and kind of really examine them to see what they mean to different stakeholders and who's using these words and how.
So, what do you think are the key issues which are threatening human elephant coexistence?
So the key issues, I'm because of my background in agriculture, I'm focusing mostly on agriculture. So for me, I have found that, people talk about, of course, generally people talk about habitat loss, fragmentation, climate change. But because I'm someone with an agriculture background, I feel that one of the main threats is industrial agriculture, like monocrop plantations. Agriculture has always been, like since 4,000 years ago, as per Sukumar, the source of like human elephant conflict. It's always been a place. And, the way we do agriculture has changed so much over the years. And agriculture, industrial agriculture especially, has really destroyed so much forests and has become less and less diverse. And in Eastern Thailand, the crops that are causing the most conflict are all cash crops. Like none of them are real food crops, things we eat to survive. It's all like sugarcane, rubber, cassava, and corn. And these are all grown for either industrial or feed purposes. So at night, these like farms become like war zones when the patrol groups go around and use these, like what they call ping pong bombs, and to like chase the elephants and push them out of these cash crop areas. And I feel that, farmers grow what is demanded by markets and governments. They don't really make that much money unless they receive subsidies. And then when they suffer any losses or have conflicts, they often get blamed by conservationists. So, but the real culprit is actually the capitalist land use. So I think there is a core problem. But unfortunately, when we look at these, conferences or meetings where people come together to like try to figure out solutions to human elephant conflict, you often don't really find people from agriculture, businesses, or companies, or even the agriculture department there. So I think there's some kind of like agriculture is just not as much taken into consideration sometimes. But this kind of agriculture, this industrial agriculture is not for survival for humans, but it's more economic. But it is a food source for elephants that comes with a lot of risk.
What socio-ecological conditions do you think can optimize human-elephant coexistence?
So I think one of the things that I realized after I've studied this research is that elephants actually interact very differently on different kinds of agricultural systems or landscapes, like the way they move through or how they behave in, say, like a protected forest versus a monocrop farm versus a community forest or an agroforest system is very different. So when they go to monocrop areas, they cause a lot more damage than they do in intercropped systems. So one of the main reasons I wanted to do this research in Thailand was because I wanted to work with this group of farmers who practice an agroforestry system, which is called Vanakasit. And Vanakasit translates to forest gardening. One, like from Sanskrit, forest, and kaset means agriculture in Thai. So their farms actually, if you go to these farms, they look like secondary forests. And if you didn't know it was a farm, you would not realize it. Like someone would have to tell you, this is not a forest, this is a farm. And so these farms are like amazingly diverse ecologically. And they also provide really good economic support, income to the farmers. And they also meet a lot of the self-sufficiency needs of the farmers too. So they're not just filled with plants that elephants don't like. Like it's not a deterrent system. They're actually kind of like a safe zone for elephants, where the elephants come in and they kind of move through them like they do in forests. They eat a little bit here, eat a little bit there, and they keep going. So this is sort of the ecological aspect, I would say, of the farming system. And then socially, if you met any farmer, you will know that agriculture is not just an occupation. For farmers, it's usually like a way of life and it's attached to a certain worldview. And so socially, the farmers who practice this kind of agriculture, they also have a certain philosophy that they live by that seems to guide their lifestyle. They first believe in self-sufficiency, so their systems offer them self-sufficiency and resilience no matter what the economic losses or gains are. Then they also have a very deep knowledge of forests and wild plants. Like people come to study there, like academics come and study their systems because they have all these plants that you don't find anymore sometimes in the wild even. And they also have a lot of empathy and respect for nature and wildlife. And what's amazing to me is like these are not some urban elites who like moved from cities to rural areas to practice some kind of like alternative agriculture, like permaculture or something. These are farmers who gave up monocrop farming, gave up industrial agriculture, and changed their systems because of what they believe and what they value. And they don't face almost any damage from the elephants in the same areas where their neighbors maybe will have a lot of damage. And many of them are like amazing women farmers, and these women farmers are like leaders in their communities, and they are very empathetic towards the elephants. And a lot of them actively participate in these forums where they're trying to look for solutions for human-elephant conflict, even though they themselves actually are not having so much problem, but they want to do it for their neighbors. So this for me is the most inspiring, and these are the stories that I want to highlight in my research, because I find that this, like you said, the socio-ecological conditions, they already exist. And people who live with elephants, they do know these things. And, the elephants themselves are sending us a pretty strong message by destroying our monocrop farms. So I feel like we need to listen to the elephants and farmers, and how can we learn from them and highlight their knowledge. It's already out there. So this, I think, is my role as a researcher, and I think these are the conditions that support, they're not complete, but they do help coexistence.
How do you think the management of negative human-elephant interactions can be improved? And what do you think are some long-term landscape levels measures to mitigate these negative interactions?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not an expert on this. I may not have the full answer, but I do think that when, like I said, which is the agroforestry system I was talking to you about, I think it really does have the potential to be a landscape level solution because it supports the well-being of both farmers and elephants. And I think there is a potential scenario where you could design landscape corridors for elephants that are, like I said, systems that would not disrupt or take away anyone's land. But, as a social science researcher, I'm also thinking at a more foundational level about negative interactions. And what I've found actually is that a lot of Western conservation models that sort of that believe in separating people and nature sometimes places like certain people above certain wildlife or certain animals above certain people. And this has actually caused a lot of damage and harm. So, to give you an example, in my field site where when I first visited here 3.5 years ago, some of my farmer friends were using this word coexistence when talking about human elephant relations. But this year, when I came back, the same people have stopped using this word. And when I asked my friend why she doesn't use this word, she said that it's not a word she can use anymore. She said it's become too risky and it's kind of banned. And I was like, wow, why is that? And I think after being here, it seems to be that it's happened because a lot of villagers are very angry at conservation organizations and government agencies for imposing this word and their meaning on them. This word has a very different meaning, which we haven't talked about yet, but they feel like, there's a certain imposition of what coexistence means, and the villagers feel like they're expected to live with elephants while they lose their lives and limbs, and that their lives are less important than elephants. And unfortunately, this kind of imposition or accusation that is made by outsiders actually fuels a lot of the negative interactions at the landscape level, which and now because it's becoming more antagonistic between villagers and government and villagers and elephants. It's becoming more and more intense, and then elephants are becoming more aggressive. So I believe that no matter what solution is proposed, whether we talk about landscape level, forest, agriculture, socioeconomic, I feel the solution needs to come from the ground up, and it has to have some kind of radical imagination. Because, when you go on the ground and in reality, you see that there is no separation between people and nature, like on a day-to-day basis. So it shouldn't be in policy also. It shouldn't be at a landscape level solution either. So I think it's much easier for us to think about like either removing people from an area or drawing a border around nature, what we think is nature. But, this kind of middle path where somehow there's space for both is very difficult for us to imagine. But I think those are the kind of long-term solutions to change these negative interactions.
So, what is the issue with the term human animal conflict, and why is human wildlife coexistence the better term?
Yeah, sure. I find this very interesting. Yeah. I wasn't super paying attention to it, I think, before I came into the field. But after coming here, I'm starting to see how important the words are, And something I found really interesting after coming here is that, very few farmers and villagers use the word conflict, first of all, to describe the situation they're facing. They actually use the word problem. They use problem with elephants. And I found that it's mostly media or government officials or conservationists who used this word conflict or human elephant conflict, like this technical kind of term. And then when it comes to coexistence, I realized that the meaning of the term varies so much between different groups of people. So to the government officials or conservation organizations and urban environmentalists, it seems to imply some kind of harmonious cohabitation in shared landscapes, like somehow, we live together harmoniously. And then when you talk to like ground level forest department officers or rangers or patrol groups, to them, coexistence is like about separating villages and elephants so that there are no deaths and damages. Like to them, that is coexistence. Like how can we cope so that don't have to interact with each other and lead to conflict? But my favorite understanding of coexistence comes from this Vanakasit farmers, the group of agroforestry farmers who I work with most closely. And the way they describe it is coexistence is about co-survival. They say it means like, this is translated from Thai, but they say we cannot live together, but we have to survive together. And coexistence to them is not some idealistic notion, but it's about accepting reality and survival. So even the agriculture systems actually are a reflection of that. They're not going to ever make the kind of money, you can make with cash crops, but they will survive. And they are much more accepting of the reality of elephants being in the area. So I think their idea of coexistence is about, how can we both have enough to survive this together? And it's not easy at all. so for me, this kind of understanding of conflict and coexistence after coming to the field has been very helpful. And then personally, I was coming at it just because I felt like conflict was very polarizing. I was finding the word conflict very polarizing, and I found that coexistence, instead of talking about human-elephant conflict, if we use the term human-elephant coexistence, it allows for more types of interactions. It could be tolerance, could be respect, it could be, love too, in some cases. So, yeah.
So, let's take a step back in your career. You worked a lot in various agricultural systems. So, talk a bit about your experience in the agriculture. Sorry, I repeat. Talk a bit about your work in the agricultural sector, and especially with regenerative agriculture and permaculture.
Sure, sure. So I think, as I mentioned, like I kind of have always been interested in finding alternative solutions or alternative kind of systems to industrial agriculture. And, when I first started my master's, or during my master's, which I started in 2008, and finished in 2010. I actually wrote about the farmers' suicides in India that were, between 1997 to 2007. And at that time, I was really shocked and really saddened by that. And I felt that one of the main reasons for these suicides was the failure of industrial agriculture, especially genetically modified seeds. And so I wanted to find a solution. I was like, this can't be the only way to do agriculture. So at that time, I sort of began this exploration for myself. And I started working on different kinds of farms and in environmental NGOs. And so I started with organic farming, just like small scale vegetables. And after doing some experiments with that in India, and I decided that, it just didn't feel like enough. Like organic farming just felt like was the same system, but just you put organic input instead. And so I was like, I want to learn something different. And so I turned towards permaculture and regenerative agriculture. And the difference, I think that to me, the difference between them is, I think regenerative agriculture is a little bit more like, to me, it's a bit more like using what you have, the resources on the land to regenerate the land. If you're familiar with the Fukuoka one straw revolution or zero budget farming in India, there I would say these are regenerative agriculture systems, and they're about land, animals, how to integrate. Whereas permaculture is a little bit more like a lifestyle. It's about what you value, how you want to live your life, and then you sort of adjust your life and all the systems in your life, including food, energy, housing, everything, to meet these values. And I would say this is more similar to what the Vanakaseta agroforestry farmers are doing in Thailand. But their system is a more traditional system, whereas permaculture is a name that these, Australian men gave to an already existing traditional systems. So at the essence of permaculture and Vanakaseta agroforestry is actually very similar in that it's driven by values and then sort of goes onto the land. So yeah, I have worked in on different farms and gardens, and my last job before I started the PhD, I was managing a farm. What do you call it? It's like an agricultural park, which is home to 6 different small scale farmers in California, and I was supporting their farming system there. So yeah, that's my background in agriculture. Yeah.
Talk about how regenerative agriculture and permaculture can be used to tackle the climate crisis, and talk about some of the other socioeconomic and ecological benefits of these agricultural systems.
Sure. I'll talk a little bit more about permaculture because I'm less experienced in regenerative agriculture, but I think the benefits are quite similar. But one of the systems in permaculture of land use is food forests. And this idea is a forest gardening is the same. And throughout the world, these forest gardens existed from North America to like all of South Asia, Southeast Asia. This was the norm before in how we grew food. And a lot of times these were also swidden or, the slash and burn, as we say, that kind of system. These were incorporated into this food forest systems. And I mean, it's just, it's incredible because you can imagine these are basically like forests that you have chosen each and every plant that provides you something of benefit. So it provides you social, economically, it provides you with food, medicine, firewood, housing, building materials, pretty much everything you need. And then economically, these are all value added products. These used to be harvested from the forest. These are high value products that you can sell. And then ecologically, it's so extremely diverse that the climate change wise, the benefits are enormous. And, nowadays, I mean, obviously, carbon credit or carbon farming has been so huge. But now people are shifting from carbon to biodiversity farming or using biodiversity as an index for carbon for climate rather than just carbon. Because you could have a land filled with trees, just the same tree, and you could call it an agroforest and say you got so much carbon. But nothing beats a biodiverse landscape, which has not just carbon benefits, but so many benefits for wildlife. So yeah, in permaculture, these forest gardening systems, this is the biggest benefit. And then just like any forest, they're the most resilient when it comes to climate change, flooding and droughts. And I see that practically all the time when I compare the impacts. Like this year, it was such a severe drought in Thailand, but the agroforestry farmers were not as impacted as the monocrop farmers. So yeah, the benefits are really visible. And, for farmers who are constantly dealing with all kinds of risks, whether it's elephants or climate or market, they're constantly dealing with risks. These are some of the most stable systems for them.
So, what have been some of the most prominent challenges in your agricultural and wildlife research work so far?
Um, I think it's a very good question because, yeah, there are so many challenges, right? I mean, for anyone working in wildlife or anything environmental, the situation is in most places is very severe. It's very heartbreaking. And I feel similarly about my site. So inspired of this amazing examples of coexistence, like overall, there's a sense of helplessness, as things become more intense. But there's also a lot of people trying to make things better. And as far as like I'm concerned, I'm an outsider here, but I'm also not a complete outsider. Somehow being from India makes it less of an outsider than say if I was a white American or something. And but there are definitely the challenges sort of that come with that. As far as being an outsider, and sometimes it gives me some access to talk to people. Like, so they would say things to me maybe that they wouldn't say to someone who's Thai. But at other times, I also cannot really access the deeper truths about what people think. So that's a challenge. And I don't fully understand. There's a lot of politics. I'm sure that this is the case in India as well, in conservation and work. And there's a lot of different people, a lot of different politics. And yeah, I'm growing a lot. Let's just say I'm learning a lot and I'm growing a lot as I learn how to navigate these politics and keep sort of focused on what is important to me. And agriculturally, I'm very much, my goal is to continue to support the farmers and the elephants people also want to know what side are you on? Are you on the side of the elephants or the people? And I'm like, I'm always on the side of farmers and elephants while constantly navigating this difficult, terrain together. So, yeah, these are some of my challenges so far. But I'm definitely very grateful for the experience. It's intense but very meaningful experience.
And what about your most memorable moment so far?
Uh, that's also a good question. There's many, but I think one of the most wonderful things about coming in as a researcher rather than as some kind through an NGO or some kind of expert is that you're here to learn, so you get to witness and be part of so many amazing things without necessarily you're not here to do something, to change somebody or get someone to do something. You're just here to learn. And I think that is the best part about my PhD experience so far. And I'll just share one very nice recent experience. So, it's been very bleak and kind of the conflict, you hear these stories sort of, oh, this person died and that, one person died and elephant killed and this person, you hear these kind of stories and you're like, wow, if you see an elephant, you basically run. You don't want to meet an elephant. But then recently I had a chance to accompany this film crew that came to shoot the situation of human-elephant conflict in Eastern Thailand, and I was just kind of following them around, and then we got to Miss Mamuang, and Mamuang means mango in Thai, and this guy is a 30-year-old male, and he's wild. He's not captive. He's never been tamed. And he just has his sort of territory, which includes a lot of villages. And all these villages, they know him and they don't mind him. In fact, they love him. And he just kind of walks through the village and there's no problem. And so I got to witness that. And I just saw him walking through the main road while the people were just sitting and eating pad thai. And he just walks by and they talk to him and they're like, oh, let these people take your photo before you go. Like this, they're talking to him and he's just doing his thing. And yeah, it was just so heartwarming to see that, because otherwise, you keep hearing these stories that are so sad. So yeah, that was definitely a very memorable moment that really keeps me going to do this work.
So that is the final question I had for you today. Thank you so much for taking time out for this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anish. This was really fun. And I really wish you good luck for these podcasts and keep them going.
Thank you.